Hi, welcome to the Scuttlebutt Podcast. I'm Rich, and today I have as a guest a very good trapper, a friend here, Jim Gibb, and we are sitting in Toronto.
And we call it the Big Smoke
Why do they call it the Big Smoke?
because it's just a big smog place. Too many people crammed into too many places and just too many vehicles.
Absolutely, there's a lot of people here, man. I've been walking around downtown today, and I just can't believe the number of people.
Yeah, it's unbelievable.
And you know, it's funny for a place that all the polls say believes in the carbon tax. There's a lot of vehicles here.
Incredible. You always plan an extra half an hour no matter what you do here because you're going to be in traffic no matter what.
So tell me, you have been a trapper for most of your life. How did it start for you?
Well, I started off, I was best friends with a French family. It was the son next door to me, and their family did the hunting, fishing, and trapping. And I just kept following along, and 40 years later, here I am. I'm still trapping.
Okay. So in the beginning, they had a registered trap line then?
Yeah, that's our system in Ontario, especially the northern part of Ontario. There's about 28 registered trap lines in Ontario. And I'm from the Timmins area, so the Timmins district, and that's where I started trapping. So they had a registered line, and I used to tag along. And it was funny because after a while, the son didn't really care to go, but I always went out with the dad. And Saturday morning, he'd pick me up at the end of my driveway, and if I slept in, I was not a very happy camper the whole week because I missed going trapping. So that's how it all started for me.
So what did they trap for back then?
Mostly beaver and marten. That were the two big ones. A little bit of lynx, wolves, pretty well everything, but primarily beaver and marten.
No kidding.
Yeah, and I remember the beaver, the marten used to average about $15. That was about the average. That was considered a good average.
Yeah. No, and beaver today are probably averaging that.
Or less. Yeah. The caster and big beaver's worth more than the little beavers right now.
Absolutely. I did so good on the last auction on my caster. I'm embarrassed how much I've used for bait. You know, I make my own lure with it, and it's like, my goodness. What was the top price on number one?
I think it was 105
Yeah.
Canadian. Yeah, 105 Canadian. So that's pretty good money for caster when you think about it. And the primary takers of that are the perfume trade, so that really gives it a boost. So it's kind of nice when you see ladies dabbing the stuff on and they don't realize it's beaver caster.
Yeah, and especially if you're at a point to where it comes from on the beaver.
Yeah,
that would be even more fun.
Yeah, well, you know that's the saddest thing with today's world is most people don't realize where their raw product actually is, where it came from. You know, I used to give a lot of tours at the auction house in North Bay, and I used to have there's a teachers' university there, so I'd always plant the seed in the teacher's mind. What was this before it became a product? You know, you're wearing running shoes. What do you think the leather? Where does the leather come from? And they had no clue. You know, they'd be wearing $100, $150 running shoes, and they're basically made from kangaroo leather.
Yeah.
No idea.
I know.
You know, no connection to the land. It's just
it's
a product.
And it's got worse. I mean, I come from a remote area in Alberta, and I never thought I would live long enough to where that connection was being lost, but it is lost now.
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
Absolutely, and you know, it's so different to see it happen that people just don't have any idea where it comes from. That's one of the funny things about the TV show is that it has put us in contact with a lot of people.
Absolutely.
And perhaps the saddest thing that you ever hear is people talk about, well, I thought trapping was illegal. I thought we didn't know we could do it anymore. And it's like, it built the country, and yes, it's very legal, it's very viable, and it's very necessary today. So you started trapping with your next door neighbor, and that built obviously a lifetime passion.
Absolutely, yeah. And I trap year round. I work for a company in the off season that does wildlife control work. So basically, I go from the trap line to the urban trap line, and then when that's done, I go back to the trap line.
So that's your full time year round.
Year round trapper, yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
You've achieved heaven.
Some days when it's 80 degrees out, or 30 degrees out Celsius, it's not heaven, but it's very interesting. I mean, and I deal basically with raccoons and the big gray squirrels, the large squirrels.
Yes.
Those are the two biggest problem animals. I just did a job in North Bay this winter. A lady called me up and she said she had something in her attic, and it's the most raccoon I've ever done on a job. I took 7 raccoons out of her attic.
Wow.
Unbelievable, yeah. 7 raccoons, 12 big squirrels, 3 chipmunks, and a skunk. That's what I caught on that job.
Out of one attic.
Out of one place, yeah. Like 1 yard. It was incredible. Like,
it's amazing. It's amazing though. People talk about, so many people are against trapping and that, but between the pushback we're getting on trapping and the fact that fur prices have dropped, and this is the result. Is now we're doing more and more damage control than we've ever done.
Well, absolutely, and I mean we have urban sprawl, incredible. Like it's unbelievable in Ontario. Like I work in what we call the Golden Horseshoe. It's basically from Toronto down to Niagara,
Right.
and you'll drive by a road, and then I'll be off for 2 weeks. I'll come back and they started an apartment building or something. Like it's incredible how quick subdivisions pop up and new housing, and it's just sprawling. So it's coming into conflict with animals for sure. And people today don't know how to deal with that.
No. I mean, I believe it was your son. When I talked to your son in Yellowknife, and he was just finishing his degree there, and he said he wrote his paper. His thesis was on trappers and how they created a buffer between civilization and the wild, and it was really cool. I've actually used quoted that line many times.
Yeah, that's my oldest son James. He went through for anthropology and it's very true. Like we have a skill set that's very unique, and as time keeps progressing and people get further away from the land, the skills that we possess are even more valuable. And I think it's really important for trappers to be able to make that transition if they want to do wildlife control work, to make sure the number one thing they usually don't do is charge enough.
Right.
Because they undervalue the skills that they have, because people don't know what to do with a raccoon in the attic or a groundhog on the lawn or a skunk under the shed or something. So all these different things that we take for granted, it's just 747 for most people. They just don't understand,
Well, and if we can, let's explore that a little bit. But first off, the costs. What does it cost to remove a skunk? Or
I usually charge a minimum of $250.
Right.
Because I call it the bomb. Everybody can catch the bomb, but what do you do with it? Because you can buy a live trap in any hardware store in Ontario.
Exactly.
So people want to do it themselves, save a few bucks, and all of a sudden they catch a skunk, and skunks go off, right?
Oh yeah.
And if it goes off in the wrong place, it's not only the smell, but it could get on your house, and then you're trying to live with that smell or whatever. So people don't understand how to deal with it, and they'll call you up after the fact. They know you're in the business, and they say, "Well, I have a skunk in a cage. What can you do for me?"
Good luck.
It's $250. I'll take care of it for you.
Exactly.
Because you just don't understand. Like you just can't put a skunk anywhere. So.
Well, and that's the other question now. What do you do with the animals? Like I understand a lot of people today have an issue with, they want it to be live trapped and moved somewhere else. Is that legal in Ontario? In
Ontario, we have a law that says you can only move a live captured animal 1 kilometer.
1 kilometer.
So I mean, it'll be back before I can get back to the house. It'll be back in the attic. If it's a raccoon or something. So we euthanize pretty well everything we catch.
Okay.
And we use a carbon dioxide chamber.
Right.
So we do use a very specific, proper method to do it. And that's what I like to caution trappers that think they want to get into this, is make sure they understand the laws for dispatch and that. It's not as simple. Like you can't drown them. That's against the law in Ontario.
Okay.
So there's a lot of little pitfalls you can fall into. And I think the biggest concern is the tools are different, slightly different, because you're going to use live traps rather than kill traps.
Yes.
Because if you catch an incidental animal like a cat, house cat, if you catch him in a 220, nobody's going to be happy.
No.
So you have to go to the live traps. And, I think urban wildlife control work is probably 90% dealing with people and 10% dealing with the animals. Because you have to be able to explain to people how it's going to work, what's going to be done, make them feel at ease, what you're going to do and how you're going to do it. It's just, and I mean, it's a lot of covert operations. Like you don't do things out in the open.
Right.
And then you'll see in the paper sometimes, and especially over in Scarborough, there was one this spring where, a raccoon got caught in a foot trap. Well, that's usually a homeowner again that's frustrated, that's trying to take things into his own hands to save some money, and then it makes a front page of the Toronto Star, which nobody wants to do.
No. We had a dog get killed in Edmonton this year. Just in one of the suburbs, or I believe it was an illegally set 330, but I don't know the final outcome of it. I was asked to comment on it, and my simple comment was, how many dogs got run over that day in Edmonton? And the guy didn't get where I was going. I said, well, if your dog gets run over, whose fault is that? Well, mine. I'm supposed to control my dog. Well, I says, then why was it the trapper's fault that the dog was out of somebody's control and went in there? You know, it wasn't like it was in his yard.
No, absolutely. And I mean, you know, you can see how big Toronto is.
Yes.
Well, the reason we have so much urban sprawl is because everybody wants to buy 5 acres out in the country and build a big house.
Right.
And then they get there, the first thing they do is they put up no hunting, no trapping signs, and they start letting their dog run around.
Yeah.
So invariably it gets into a skunk or it gets into a porcupine or unfortunately sometimes it gets into traps. And I mean, they're all mad at everybody because they don't understand it. Just because they live in the country now, it doesn't mean they don't have to have care and control that animal, you know?
Well, they wouldn't let their dog, if they lived down here, they wouldn't let the kick the door
Absolutely.
and let the dog out run around. They wouldn't.
Yeah, but it's a different mentality when they get out in the country until they start to understand how it works, you know?
I know we have that issue happens with our version of urban sprawl out in the prairies is somebody moves out to an acreage that they kick their dog out and it starts chasing the neighbor's cattle.
Oh, yes.
And they don't live long when that happens,
Yeah.
and then they're upset. But
yeah, same thing. I mean, it's a totally different environment, and then there's rules in those environments too, and they just don't seem to understand. It takes I mean, I own a dog. I'm very passionate about owning dogs, but I mean, at the same time, it's frustrating to see how people just leisurely let them off the leash and let them run, and it causes problems.
yeah, and it doesn't work out good. Usually not for the dog or for the owner.
Yeah.
So
Absolutely.
I understand there's getting to be a real explosion of raccoon.
Well, Toronto's a raccoon capital of the world.
Is that a fact? Is that
Yeah.
true fact?
David Suzuki did a documentary on it on raccoons in Toronto. You can Google it and check it out. But it's incredible the numbers here because Toronto has a lot of rivers that run through it, and they're all treed. Well treed, so it's just like an urban mecca for them. They just have waterways that travel up and down, and they love dog food, so cat food. They just fit right in, and people will, cats are nocturnal, so everybody wants to kick the cat out at night, and they free bowl it, so they'll have a bowl of food out there for it. So once a raccoon figures out there's a meal every night, he's there every night getting his share. So and there's lots of old houses, there's lots of old structures in Toronto, so it's perfect places for them to den up. So it becomes quite an issue.
Well, see, we don't have any raccoon where I am, and I've never seen a live raccoon in the wild.
Well, we have a raccoon. I mean, there's no shortage of raccoon. You'll see them dead on the road here all over the place, and we have a big problem right now in Ontario, more in the Hamilton area where I work all the time, is with the raccoon rabies outbreak. It's been going on for 4 years now, so I think they're well over 250 cases now. So.
Man.
Yeah, so and millions of dollars spent trying to control it now.
Yeah, people don't see that side of it, do they?
No.
They don't understand the
No,
ramifications. They want to pat it on the head and it's a nice animal and Disney and Kumbaya and all that kind of stuff, but they don't see the costs.
I think people have been Disneyfied. You know, they watched all the different cartoons that come out, and starting with Bambi, and it kind of put a bad label on hunting and fishing and trapping sort of thing, and we're suffering from it today. But the reality is, whether there's a fur trade, which is my passion, I'd much rather be fur trapping all the time. Animals are going to have to be dealt with, and I mean, if you have a good skill set and you're able to communicate well, you can do very well doing urban wildlife control work. Very well.
How many people ask what's going to happen to the animal?
Pretty well everyone.
Right.
And I mean, it's nice that we have this law in Ontario where you can only move them a kilometer away, and it's easy to explain to them, because the reason for the law is because you don't want to spread diseases.
Right.
Plus, you take an animal that's in its home range, capture it, move it, and then you're throwing it in another animal's home range, and it's going to fight. They're territorial, like they're
absolutely
just like people. Like if I moved into your house unannounced, it's not going to go very well.
No. And you wouldn't have to worry about me. You'd have to worry about Sandy. Jim Comstock, you're probably very familiar with, and his traps. He makes those cage traps. He was telling me about in New York, they can move them.
Okay.
And that's what he said. Overwhelmingly, people want them.
Absolutely,
moved,
sure.
And he understands it, but he says it's going to come to an end as well, because it's just you can't keep it up. I mean, and those animals keep coming back.
Well, there's actually a company in Toronto here that won't put down any animals. What they do is they'll come into your house and they'll put a one-way door on it. So the raccoon gets excluded from that house, but you have like 250 houses in a row that are all designed the same. So he knows how to pop the soffit up to get it in. So he just moves to the next house. So the guy never runs out of work. He just keeps moving them down the street.
And people actually pay for that?
They don't want to see the animal die. So I mean, it's out of your yard, so it's not your problem anymore. And then it's the next guy's and the next guy. And by the time they figure it out and get outraged about it, it's 10 or 15 people have been
right.
Paying for the same raccoon to move along.
It is quite the gig, isn't it?
Oh, it's quite the business model for sure.
So the squirrels and raccoons, skunk, and beaver, those are the problems?
Main ones, yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
And then we're having a lot of problems now because of all the different ravines and the rivers that go through the southern areas with coyotes now.
Tell me about this. You guys have had a law enactment about red wolf or coy wolf or
well,
you can't.
It's called the Algonquin wolf. It's kind of a made up wolf because the Algonquin's kind of like an island in the middle of Ontario of Crown land. That's a park.
Okay.
And there's always been wolves there, and it's a smaller eastern type wolf. It's not a true timber wolf in a sense. It's a timber wolf, but it's a timber wolf that's evolved to hunt deer. So he's slightly smaller than his northern cousins.
My understanding is that genetically all wolves in North America are gray wolves.
That's it. Yeah.
Correct.
Exactly.
But this is like a smaller.
Yeah, it's a subspecies. It would
Okay.
Nature always lets animals take advantage of whatever the habitat will provide, right? So
Correct, yeah.
because they're been isolated and there's a good deer population, that they tend to they've evolved to hunt deer, so they don't need a big moose or a big wolf like it takes to take down a moose.
Yes.
So that's the advantage. But now the problem is the coyotes have spread so much that they're mixing now with this wolf, and it's becoming a mongrel. It's not even a true wolf anymore. It's got all kinds of DNA in it.
Well, the article I read on it and the research that I've been able to done, it is the only true coy wolf. As much as everybody talks about coy wolves throughout Canada and the U.S., that it's the only true one that they've truly done genetic work on.
It's a very controversial subject in Ontario, and I like.
But all the same, it's a hybrid.
Yeah, it's a hybrid
that has been caused because of the loss of habitat or population changes, forcing them together.
What they're trying to do now is they're shutting down trappings in township after township. At first, they had the Algonquin Park. There was no trapping in. Then they included 25 townships around the park about 10 years ago, and now they've expanded it again. And what they're trying to do is keep truer genetics of this wolf rather than have it interbreed with the coyotes. But in nature,
how does that work, though?
It doesn't work because in nature there's losers and winners. Right now, the winners are the coyotes.
Absolutely.
I mean, they've expanded their range. If you went back to the 50s, there was basically no coyotes east of the Mississippi River. Now they're right across North America, including the island of Newfoundland.
Right.
I was out in Newfoundland there 15 years ago, and we had a little workshop, and they were saying, what are we going to do? We got coyotes here. I said, well, teach your trappers how to catch coyotes because they're not going away anymore.
They are
once they're in,
ultimate survivor.
Yeah, they are. Cockroaches and coyotes at the end of the world.
Everybody talks about if nuclear bomb went off, there'd be cockroaches and rabbits. No, the coyote would be there eating the rabbit.
Yeah, whatever's left. Yeah, probably feeding on the cockroaches. Yeah. But really, my true passion in life is fur trapping. I have access to 3 registered trap lines. I have my own registered trap line. My wife has a registered trap line, and my dad has a registered trap line. So I'd much rather spend my time catching fur for the fur trade. Especially one of the things I really like catching is pine marten. I'm a little sour on the beaver now because I mean Ontario is pretty well. If you fly over Ontario, it's all water.
Right. Yeah.
And there's we have the potential in the 79-80 season we produced 225,000 beaver in Ontario.
That's mostly because of your quota system, correct?
Part of it, yeah, for sure. And I mean, all through the 80s, when the fur trade was was its last really big run there, we produced over 150,000 beavers a year in Ontario. Wow. Now the harvest is around 50,000.
Right.
So those other beavers are still coming out of the system.
Yes.
But now the mining companies are paying you to do it. The railway companies, the highway guys, cottagers, landowners. It's coming out a different way, and it's kind of sad in a way because, for instance, like we're having a great run with coyotes right now.
Yep.
And the trim it's going on the different parkas, and you don't have as many problems with coyotes because there's a fur market for them, and it's taking care of itself.
Well, Alberta, on average is shipping 40,000 coyotes a year.
Absolutely.
You can imagine if that's not being taken out of the system.
Yeah.
You know, like I mean, and the trappers are doing it for free.
Yeah.
You know, and it's compared to cost incurred with it. Whereabouts are your trap lines, your registered lines? How far north are they?
Well, if my first line is 4 hours north of here, and then my other 2 lines are 8 hours north of here.
Okay, so up in pretty remote area.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, my first line's in North Bay, and then my other 2 lines are in Timmins. Timmins is my hometown. That's where I grew up in.
And how large of area are your trap lines?
204 square kilometers in one, and I think 194 is the other one. And my other one in North Bay is a bit smaller. It's probably about 160.
And how do you get around on them?
Well, mostly I use everything. I use boats, motors. I use ATVs. I use skidoos. Some of the roads have access. I can drive on them. So whatever it takes, I'm in.
So the waterways are your big highway.
Yeah, big part of it for sure. Yeah.
So you have that tough point between where
transition period. Yeah.
Yeah, it's too thick for the boat and too thin for
the
snowmobile.
Every year. Yeah. But if you plan it right, because then you can usually run your roads for 10 days or 15 days until it really firms up.
Right.
So I've always fooled around. Like, it's nice if you can do it, is to take your beaver in the open water just before freeze up, to try to get your maximum price out of them, because it's too much work now to take them under the ice, because you get basically the same price you get for under ice beavers you do fall beaver, which is not very good, right?
But I do it then anyway, because I'm out there running for. At the same time, I'm out running for lynx and otter and that. And I do my beaver through the ice, and I have a little different focus too. But I like to.
Well, when you have to catch 120, you try to figure out a way to do it.
I'd be out shooting.
Yeah, because in Ontario we're regulated by law to trap 75% of our assigned beaver quotas.
Yeah.
So you try to find the easiest and the best way to do it, the most efficient way.
Absolutely, yeah.
And we don't throw our caster away right now.
No. That's good. That's good. Do you get a lot of snow on your lines?
This year is the most snow that I've seen in 20 years minimum. It's unbelievable how much snow we had this year. It just started snowing. It hardly snowed until just before Christmas, and it didn't stop until the middle of March.
Yeah.
And I mean, I keep bees, and I finally was able to unwrap my bees, but I'm still not able to really go through my hives and clean them all up and get them ready because swarming season will start here in a couple of weeks, because it's going to switch. But it's just continuously, we've had quite a bit of flooding in Ontario, if you notice in the news. Yeah. That's all because of the incredible amount of snow we had this year.
Yeah.
And I mean, most of the time nature can handle it, but when it starts to rain, it can't do both.
No.
That's where the problem is.
No.
And I was up in Gogama there last Saturday. Not this Saturday that just passed, but the Saturday before. And Gogama is basically between Sudbury and Timmins, and they still had over 2 feet of snow in the bush.
Wow.
So if it turns, and sometimes it turns like that, if it goes to 25 degrees or something and it starts to rain, there's going to be a lot of flooding in North Bay and Sudbury yet.
I like how we have a higher than average snowpack, and then we have a little bit of an accelerated spring, and all of a sudden it's climate change, and that it's got nothing to do with the fact that we're building on floodplains for the last 100 years.
Well, and down in this part of the world where it's farm country, every farmer's tile drained his fields now.
Yeah.
So it rains over here, and it's in Lake Ontario in 20 minutes because it's just out it goes, And
it's like parking lots, right?
Exactly.
It's the flooding that caused by all the pavement and concrete we have in the city here.
Every time they make a 250 house subdivision, and then beside that they make themselves a little place to put a Walmart up and everything else, and it's just incredible the amount of land they're gobbling up, and it's sad in a way because we have some of the best farmland anywhere, but they just keep building on it. There's just no stopping them. It's just incredible.
Well, we see that out west too, because you have the incredible farmland, but that's where they because the farmers were there, so they built a town there. Yeah. And now these subdivisions are going over top of land that has 2 feet of black dirt.
Yeah, that's criminal.
But that's just the way that it was set up. No future planning, right?
Yeah.
Marten are your favorite. How many marten would you catch in a season? Average season.
Well, my quotas are about 150.
Okay, now that's a maximum.
That's my maximum catch, yeah. So it's not like my beaver quota. They don't care if I catch one, but don't go past 150.
Okay.
Now, in the last few years, because there's so much commercial logging done on our registered lines, because we're multi-use type of structure, my marten catch has been way down. So I'm lucky now to catch 50 marten in a good year.
Okay. And your favorite way of catching, your favorite set?
Basically a horizontal box in a 120.
Right.
And my favorite trap is a Savage Note 2001-5.
Okay. So do you put that on the ground?
I usually put it on a running pole.
Okay.
And I used to put it horizontally. I used to leave 2 wings on the side of my boxes and nail them right up to the tree.
You're right.
And it worked perfect for years. But just recently, because my north bay line, I have as many fisher as I have marten.
Yes.
And I'll get refusals. So I've been playing with the set. So now I'll take a 6-inch tree, cut it off at 4 feet, angle it, and I'll actually put a running pole right up and I'll mount the box right on top.
Okay.
And what I do, you always have that issue with the bait kind of trying to roll out on you and you're wiring the bait in or something. So what I do is I take my chainsaw and I cut a flat spot on top of my running pole.
Gotcha.
So it makes a really nice set.
Yeah. I always just cut a piece of half-inch mesh.
Yeah.
And throw the bait in, shove that in on it, because my box is taper.
Yeah, perfect.
And that holds it in place. Speaking of bait and lure, do you have a favorite bait and lure for Marten?
Beaver.
Well, yeah, of course.
We got lots of beaver. No, never shortage of beaver.
Do you like it fresh or tainted?
Fresh.
Okay. Because I some people like it. They leave it on the floor in the garage until it's rolling, and then it's time to.
Well, and that's one thing I really watch is I have a couple of spare freezers and I process my beaver in the fall. So I cut the heads off and I gut them.
Yep.
But I always leave the tail on for a handle.
Okay.
And then I freeze them like that. And I'll fill a freezer or even 2 freezers just with carcasses, minus the parts. And then those parts that I don't use, I take them out and I start my wolf dumps with them.
Right.
So I take I learned a trick from a friend of mine, Fernier, where we bury the bait. You have issues with ravens or magpies or whatever stealing all your bait. So what we do is we dig a hole roughly the size of a 5-gallon pail.
Yes.
And every time we go in there, we dump it, and then we'll just cover it with leaves and dirt because ravens can't dig.
No, they can't. Yeah.
And I'll throw a few scraps around to get them squawking. But every time the wolf pack comes through, they're good at digging. They're thinking they're getting one up on the next guy, and it really works well for us. And it's a way to control the bait. Plus, it doesn't make a huge present. Like you see guys that'll go out with a pickup load of bait and they'll throw it all over the place. Well, every bird for 200 miles is there.
Well, that's what you're feeding is birds.
Yeah, exactly.
I'll bet 80 or 90%.
Absolutely.
In some cases, like I didn't have wolves come to my trap line at all last year, so that's all I fed. Well, and a few coyotes.
Yeah.
I mean, I know there was a few coyotes because I actually got to skin them this year because usually if I catch a coyote on a wolf bait, the wolves eat it.
Okay.
But
right.
That's our coy wolf out there.
Yeah.
That's that turd laying there. That's a coy wolf. So that's the way it works for me. But you know what I did this year? I do the same thing as you. Process my beavers. I take and gut them, and then that goes into a pail for the wolf baits and all that. I took and chopped a bunch of them up. I chopped them up, pre-chopped them and everything, and put them into like 10-liter Rubbermaid totes. You can put about three, almost 4 30, 40-pound beaver in that tote. Like, I mean, that's minus the head and the tail and the guts. But it's amazing how much you put in there. And then when it comes time to set boxes, well, you got all those fist-sized chunks in there.
Well, I made a huge mistake one year is I processed all my beaver and I didn't put them in plastic bags. And I threw them all in the freezer. When you have a block freezer, it's almost impossible to get them out of there.
And you know what? It's really hard to swing an axe in a narrow area like that.
Oh, yeah. It doesn't work.
Ask me how I know.
Yeah. So every step has a process.
And usually, especially for men, there's a learning curve involved.
Yeah.
Lots of wolves on your line?
There can be, yeah, for sure, yeah. You wipe out the pack, and then it takes them a year or so to come back, and they move back in again.
Right.
And I was doing a lot of... I've been heavily involved with the Fur Institute of Canada for a number of years, and I was doing some work with the trap research, testing different models of wolf traps.
Right.
So we would dirt hole them out in the fall, and that was very interesting because there's a really stiff protocol you have to follow.
Okay.
You have to document all your catches, and you can't take pictures of the animal when he's alive for trophies because you don't want any stress on the wolf and that. So we were testing a couple of different models of traps, and it's kind of a real eye opener because what I learned is. Somebody, a trapper will find an improvement in a trap or he'll design the trap or something, but he doesn't really have the field staff to actually take it out in the field and really see if it works or not. And the first one we ever did was we did the Belial foot snare.
Yes.
And we had 45 of them we set. And 2 days later, we dug them all up because the tabs would fall off. And it was just something you found out. When you run numbers of traps,
Yes.
that's when if you run 2 or 3 or 10, it doesn't really tell you much. But you run 30, 40, 50 traps, you learn a lot of stuff in a hurry.
So how is the tabs falling off?
Well, it's just when he made the original ones, there's little tabs that hold the springs on. Because the way the Bilal foot snare works is that all the wire the springs do is hold it on long enough for the snare to cinch.
Yeah.
And then it's supposed to fall off.
Okay.
That's made by design. But he would take parts from his coyote model and adapted them to his wolf model because the dies are so expensive, right? When you're making traps.
Yes.
So we found that there's little tabs that hold, and then a certain amount of force makes them spring fall off.
Oh,
well, they were all falling off right away.
That was the 8-inch wolf model.
Yeah,
Okay,
yeah.
I've used the 6-inch a lot.
Okay.
But I've never used the 8-inch.
And what he did with the 8-inch is he took the coyote pan and he tried to keep it for the wolf. Well, you know how much bigger a wolf foot is compared to a coyote.
Yes.
The wolves would actually step on it and not set the trap off. Oh, so we had him increase the size of the pan by 33%.
That's fascinating.
Yeah, it was. It was very much. And then we worked 1 year with the lay trap from the fellas in the BC, and we've worked with the coral trap a few times. So
Dan Lay, this is the 76.
Yeah.
Model 76.
Yeah, that was the most powerful trap I've ever used in my life.
You don't weigh enough to set it, do you? I barely weigh enough.
You use setters to set it, yeah.
This is a big wolf trap, and it's the maximum size. It's got, 9-inch or 9 1/4 inch spread?
Yeah, at least 9.5. It's a huge trap.
And you get up and you stand on top of the springs. And
you're dancing.
I have to push down and reach down and pull myself together with it to set it. That's how powerful it is.
Yeah.
Rod Graham said that it's just about lodged him, and Rod's a bigger boy than I am.
Well, I was using a stick to set him off one time when we were shutting it down, and I wasn't paying attention, and I got whacked right between the eyes with the stick because I wasn't paying attention. So after that, I was pretty cautious.
So that passed, or did you have any modifications that have to be done for that?
We didn't. You need to catch 20 wolves in order to get it to pass.
Right.
So your sample size, generally speaking, is 20. So you need 16 passes out of 20. We hadn't caught enough wolves yet to say if it was yay or nay.
Oh, okay. Okay. And that was just trapping?
Yeah, just for trapping on my line, yeah.
No, that's what I mean. It was just trapping. It was it wasn't anything from the trap side of it. It was just the way it's worked out. Haven't had the animals yet.
Yeah, exactly.
And the coral passed.
Coral is very, very close. I don't know if it's passed yet, but I think they only need 1 or 2 more catches to get it to pass.
When does all the wolf traps have to be certified?
I believe that the safest thing would be to check with the Fur Institute of Canada and look at their trap research, their trap list. That'll tell you. But I believe it's coming into effect shortly. Yeah. If it hasn't already.
Yeah, you're right. Lynx was what, 16 on the footholds. Yeah, it's going to be.
But usually what they try to do is wait till they have 7 or 8 different models that pass.
Yeah.
Before and then they give you a 3-year phase-in period when they do put it up.
How does it work then, though? There used to be, now maybe this has changed, so correct me if I'm wrong, but it used to be that you could, because of the cost involved in these traps, that you could alter your own. You could take a trap and like you could put stops on it, or you could.
Yeah, it's usually laminating. That's usually the big one.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's usually, and I believe with the wolf traps they're still able to do it.
Okay.
Like you can't do it with when we were doing a lot of the testing on the kill type traps with the Connie bears, the rotating jaw traps, you couldn't modify them enough to make them work to do it. So that's like we lost out on the 120 Victors or whatnot.
Yeah.
You couldn't modify them enough to make them to reach a standard, you know.
Well, I noticed that a lot of those body grip traps that they had a certified model and then a post-certified model.
Yeah.
And I guess the biggest difference was they became a zero clearance trap.
That's basically it, yeah. Because we're on our 3rd generation rotating jaw traps. The first generation, you used to have enough so you could put your fingers in between the jaws, and it wouldn't pinch you.
Right.
So then the second generation come and they started having bends so that they would close tighter, and then the 3rd generation come out usually with the extra striking bar.
Yeah.
And we have really good traps. I mean, if anybody's followed along, and I followed through the whole thing, I first started trapping Marten. It was a 1.5 on the ground foothold, and now we're right into my favorite trap is the Savage 2001-5.
And it's actually a little scary.
Yeah,
for
but
Marten.
it is, but I have a lot of incidental fisher, so that's why I really like it.
And I've never used it. I like the Belial.
Yeah,
and
I
I
have
have
some.
both 120s and 160s.
Yeah.
and I catch just as many fisher in the 120 as and it kills them dead.
What you're missing is your big dogs. That's where guys miss out a lot of times, because one of the things that really drives me as a trapper is my misses.
Right.
I study when I have a trap set off. I want to know why that trap went off.
See, I do not ever have an empty trap.
Well, you watch a little closer, because
I know when they're set off and there's nothing in it. I walk up, there'll be hair there, and there'll be lynx tracks, and then the lynx will have taken the squirrel or whatever and ate it. I don't have empties. I just don't. And maybe I'm fortunate. Maybe now you've jinxed me.
when you set enough traps, you'll get some misses.
I don't disagree with you.
Yeah.
I don't very often.
Yeah, no, it doesn't. But that's one of the things that when I did the trap researching, especially with the wolf traps, your miss is more important than the catch, because when you have a catch, it's all over.
Yeah.
You pat yourself on the back, you're smiling, it's a great day. But when you miss something, that's when you gotta. That's what will make you a better trapper, because you got to figure out why it missed.
So you think that a fisher is springing the trap and getting free?
The big dog fishers, because you're catching them by the snout, because it doesn't go behind their head.
Right. You don't think that would crush its skull and kill it?
No.
Seriously?
No. Absolutely not.
Huh.
I mean, what I like to use a lot of times now is the 160 Belial.
Yes.
Because I would use 220s for fisher, and I would make 120 sets for Marten, but the Marten don't care. They run up the pole and get caught in the 220s, and I would get some fur damage because it's too much trap, especially for females.
Yeah.
Not so much with the males, but the females. So I switched to the 160s, and that's when because I get refusals. So he might not have set off the trap, but he came to the box, he checked it out, but he wouldn't commit to going into a 120 size trap.
Really?
And I watch that all the time, and that's why I kind of migrated away and gone to 160s on my North Bay line. Not so much in my Timmins line, because it's an incidental fisher up there.
Right.
It's mostly Marten, but here it's 50-50. So.
Oh, cool.
And then that's when I start getting the big dogs. Like, you'll catch large mediums like juvenile Marten or juvenile fisher, and you'll catch the female fisher every time in the 120s, no problem. But it's the big dogs. And those are the more aggressive ones that I like to kind of take out of the population. They don't pay us as well.
Yeah.
But, as a killing machine, he's a pretty efficient little guy, especially when you get him like 15 pounds, 17 pounds. Those are pretty big animals.
I've I've seen one in Alberta that was 15 pounds. My biggest was over 14. But and it came in a 120.
Yeah. Oh yeah. No, I'm not saying you won't catch him. Yeah. No, but I mean.
And he rammed his head in there like he was determined.
Oh yeah.
You're right when you say they're aggressive.
You got to thaw it right out to get it to drop off. Yeah. Because they get that cranium buildup in their skull there.
Yeah. I had him mounted because he was awesome.
Yeah.
Do you have quota on fisher?
Yes and no.
Okay.
On my northern lines, it's an open quota because we're trying to manage for Marten, and then in my North Bay line, I have a quota of on my fisher.
And how much is that?
2.
2.
10 and 2. 10 Marten, 2 fisher.
Okay.
So it's always interesting because you can't really put up a sign saying no fisher.
No,
allowed.
I know.
It's.
I'm allowed 18 fisher, and when I catch that, I shut down my Marten and everything.
Okay.
Sometimes one year in particular, I had 19 fisher, and I had 7 Marten.
Yeah.
Well,
and the Marten cycle too, right? If you've been at it long enough, you'll notice that the Marten are really cycle. Fisher are pretty steady, I find, but the Marten really cycle.
Well, I got a buddy. He's the president of our local, and he literally from my house. And I'm just across the river from Gordy. From my house, he's just in the Saddle Hills, so he's 10 kilometers away from me, and that mostly like it's hardwood hills, and there's farmland on both sides. Normally he catches in that 20 to 30 Marten a year. This last year he got over 80.
Wow.
And they were juveniles.
Yeah.
So it was just like
boom.
They
cycle.
The population exploded. Right?
And I've seen that all my life. You can go 3 years with nothing, and then all of a sudden it kind of rains Marten all of a sudden.
Yeah.
It's just I don't know if it's because it's a nice spring. I think a cold, wet spring slows them down and probably kills a lot of the
It
kits.
does kill a lot of them, yeah.
You know, and I think a nice dry spring, lots of snow in the winter helps because then they can stay under in the cold weather and hunt mice. And
Well, it's funny you talk about that because I've been doing a lot of research on. I've been writing an article on, and I really got really in depth in this, and so I've done a lot of research. I've been driving people, anybody who's ever had a name on a Marten paper, I've been getting in touch with, and studies have shown that Marten do better where there's more than an average of 6 inches of snow a month.
Yeah.
So that gives them that ability to go under the
Yeah.
snow and live.
Yeah.
And Fisher do better where there's less than.
Yeah.
You know, so it's interesting. You had, and another thing is cold. Is that Marten carry the least amount of fat for any of the mustelids, and
Yeah.
so they can actually freeze to death.
Yeah.
You know, like we had an old fashioned February back home. We had lots of 40 below in February, and it was nothing to go along the snowmobile trail, and you'd see voles and you'd see pygmy shrew. We had a terrible amount of pygmy shrew this year, but they'd be frozen to death.
Okay.
They would come out, get onto the snowmobile trail, and then they couldn't get back.
Back in, and they expired because they're a high energy user too, right?
Yes,
Yeah.
And Marten is a high energy
Yeah.
as well.
Yeah.
And so why a Marten is so easy to flesh because that fat is very, very temporary.
Yeah, exactly.
Right?
Yeah.
And so it's kind of funny to see a fur bearer that doesn't like the cold, and you know they discover that at minus 20 as they start going underneath the snow.
Yeah.
You know, and
They almost when you're trapping, they almost in that cold weather they seem to disappear.
well, and that's where we've had a lot of people talking about the last couple of years. All the Marten numbers are down, but we've had some old-fashioned winters, you know, and we're actually having more snow than we had previously. Like you take in the late 90s and the early 2000s. I mean, we had winters where we built houses all winter long.
Exactly.
It was crazy.
Yeah.
And so now we're getting back to more that traditional. So I want to ask you this, and here's the question: do Fisher have an impact on the Marten population? And I want to just set this up a bit because when I started on this last trap line that I got, we were a couple years past the end of the warm winters and the low snow, and we started to get into cold winters and much more snow. And so at the same time that I'm starting to take Fisher off of this line, you know, the weather is starting to become more cooperative towards the Marten. Now my Marten my Fisher are, I'm usually around a dozen Fisher instead of my 18, and my Marten I'm 35 to 45 kind of thing for the winter. So was it the Fisher or was it the weather?
Well, what I found in my experience is Ontario is very flat, and they do a lot of commercial logging, and I found that it devastates the Marten when they first cut, and then within 5 years your Fisher population starts to come up.
Okay.
And they do way better in a young succession forest than what the Marten do because the Marten need the canopy for protection, right? The Fisher are big. They're rough and tough. They try to take on everybody. They're basically our eastern Wolverines, as I call them, sort of thing. We don't have Wolverine to speak of in Ontario except for a little patch in the very northwestern part of the province. And they're very aggressive, and they do very well in a young forest. But as that forest starts to, once it gets into the 30-year range, well, then it starts to favor the Marten again because there's canopy and there's cover again. So there's dynamics that go on all the time there, I think.
That's fascinating. I know that one of the studies I read talked about Marten and the fact that a certain size of open spot to them was as big as a barrier as a wall. So in the case of a road,
yeah, absolutely.
Once a road started hitting 50 meters or wider in width, they wouldn't cross.
It's almost like a fence for them, yeah.
Yeah, because the owls at night and the lynx during the day. Lynx are actually a huge predator of them.
Oh yeah.
Even more so than Fisher in the.
I've killed a few lynx because they've eaten my Marten out of the. Yeah. Well, I adapted to that because I would hang lynx snares around my Marten boxes.
Yeah.
Because our lynx cycle quite a bit, and I have a quota of 16 lynx. So, at certain times when the lynx are really top end of their cycle, they're eating as many Marten as I'm catching, sort of thing. Because I always aim to have my Marten hanging high and dry.
Yes.
But it's perfect. Like you can't stop a lynx from walking along.
Just walk up buffet.
And then you get there, and all he's got left in the trap is the head.
Well, I have on my trap line is square, and I have a major oil road that comes in up in the northeast corner, and it goes around like this, and I have 42 kilometers of this on there. And where it comes across the south end, most of my marten, when I first started there, was all over in the southeast corner, and there was a couple miles between my boundary and this road, and I would catch marten in this corner, and I'd catch right up to the south ditch of this road, but I would not catch anything across the road, and it was just blew me away. And as the years went on. And I was catching more fish and more lynx, and the winters were changing, and all of a sudden I started catching marten up to the north of the road. But it was like you could plot it on, you have catch maps and you plot every year. Well, they were coming right straight out of the east. It wasn't like they were coming out of the south and across the road, but they're coming out of the east. And the ones that are on the bottom marched right across the south of the south end of the line.
And you get that a lot of too. Like your biggest challenge in Alberta is the oil and gas industry, because they're making seismic lines all over the place, right?
Yep.
But us up here, it's basically logging. And the first time they drive the road through, it's 150 meters wide. It's like a big fence through the forest.
Yeah.
But 10 or 15 years later, it basically becomes a tag alter one track trail again, and then the marten are going back and forth.
Yeah.
But it takes a long time for them to recover. It's not. Fish always do way better in the younger forest.
And where I really started paying attention to this, what actually made me start researching it was traveling on my creeks, rivers, and lakes. And every time you'd see a track, and a weasel or mustelid's track is very distinctive going across, whether it's a mink or fish or whatever it is, very distinctive. And I look at it and I go, look at it every time it's a fisher. And then I get thinking, why don't marten cross a lake? And that's actually what started it. And then somebody had already done a study on it. It was fascinating.
And there's been some interesting research done in the Northwest Territories in the big burns that they have sometimes, because sometimes they just let them burn. And the marten seem to move back into those in that area in 5 years.
Yes.
Which is kind of bizarre, but they have a bigger marten than traditionally we have, especially in Ontario here. A much bigger marten. So maybe he's able to fend for himself out in the open a bit more. But it's really interesting when I talk to the guys in the Northwest Territories and say, oh, yeah, the marten come back in 5 years after a burn.
Yeah.
They might not come back for 25 years after a clear cut in my area.
Yeah, clear cut is a whole different animal compared to a burn.
Absolutely, for sure. Right in the center of my wife's line, they had a huge burn. And it's almost, I call it a lynx factory, because it's full of rabbits and it's new growth and everything. And it's not great for the marten yet, but it'll have its day because there's so many habitat trees. And the thing that's nice about a fire is it burns a pocket, leaves a pocket, burns a pocket. So you have that fragmented habitat that when it comes back, it's super.
Well, it creates a lot of edges. It creates a lot more edges than a clear cut does. So what are they clear cutting there? Is that hardwood or is it softwood?
Softwood.
Pine.
Softwood, yeah. Mostly pine, and then a lot of black spruce in the swamps for paper and that. So
be glad that they're not doing the hardwood, because that they never seem to use again, and that's mostly what gets logged on my line is poplar for OSB, right?
Right.
And I still, the poplar were 12 feet tall. The regrowths are 12 feet tall on some of the Daishawa log stuff on my line, and still there's nothing in there. Still, I don't.
And it's you've probably just got poplar coming back in too, right?
Yeah. They don't even they don't have to replant poplar.
No, it's monoculture. It's just one species there. It's not good for the forest,
Well, it's actually better though than what happens when they do softwood, because do they spray here?
Oh yeah.
Well,
they spray, and then they do the pre-commercial thinnings, so they space out the trees and all that. So
yeah, well, I don't know so much about the pre-commercial thinning in Alberta, but my son's trap line, they do a lot of logging there, and then when they replant just with pine, because spruce is too hard to replant. Yeah. So they replant with pine, and they spray it all. You go back, and it is sterile. I mean, there are more tracks on the road out here in front of the hotel than there is in the snow underneath.
You have to walk
pine.
that 1,000 feet to the back of the cut and to see where the tracks are, really.
Yeah. Like nothing, because there's not mice or rabbits or anything in there.
Well,
right?
and just because it was commercial logging, they were forced to cut down every live standing or every snag, every dead standing tree, and so there's it's just pine basically, right? There's nothing else.
All it is
not
pine,
good.
and nothing can survive. Well, I mean, it's great habitat for a porcupine, but
well, I put up 50 of the marten boxes, the nesting boxes, to experiment with them, and what I found is that at about 24 or 25 years after regen, when it's been planted, then I start getting some usage. Now, I'm not saying it's marten, but everybody seems to be looking to use a box because there's lacking that nesting, that reproduction habitat. You know, like
Right.
you can have the perfect. It looks great, but it's like you say, it's sterile because there's not a dead standing tree in there for them to have a habitat tree. You know.
Well, what bothers me is that there's no buckbrush, there's no willow, there's nothing in there for
Yeah.
a rabbit or a squirrel or anything.
Yeah.
You know, when you have solid pine like that, the pine by its very nature, those needles falling down sterilize the ground
Yeah,
for anything
very
else.
acidic, yeah.
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 And so there's just nothing that exists there.
Yeah.
And
But it's interesting on my fortune line. Those were about my best marten habitat when they're 60, 70, 80 years old. That's where all my marten would be.
and that was in reinforced areas
Well, it was
or burn.
Yeah, burns.
Yeah,
With them natural burns, and then they would come in and clear cut them, and then it would take where I built my trap camp in Fortune Township on McCrae Lake. It took 33 years after they cut before I caught a marten again.
33 years.
33 years. So, if you live long enough, they come back.
Well, that's just it. I mean, our thing is leases in Alberta, and the whole idea behind a lease, you know, whether it's an oil lease or a road lease or whatever, is that it's temporary. Well, it's not temporary in my lifetime.
Yeah,
You know,
well, exactly.
It's permanent, right? You talk about burns, though. I remember back a buddy of mine, his trap line. It wasn't a very big line, and he had a burn go through it probably 15 years ago, and it was like marten heaven.
Yeah.
Oh, and he would laugh at me because he would, you know, it's this tiny little trap line. It was a township, and he was 60, 70 marten.
Yeah.
Just like nothing. And then we had a big wind.
Okay.
and he worked for 4 days and managed to cut 100 yards, and he gave up. I don't know if he's ever went back. That was bad because that burn was just old enough. When that big wind come, everything just flattened.
When I first got my trap line in 1983 in Fortune Township, my quota was 70 marten, and I would catch 70 marten every year. Like, just I didn't know what I was doing when I was catching 70 marten.
Yeah.
Right. And then they were cutting, and I would say the average age of the forest in my area was, you know, into the hundreds, well into the hundreds. And the first thing they did is they drove logging roads into the oldest stands to turn them over, which made sense when you're talking wood fiber, but not so much when you're a trapper. But I seen as my forest got younger, as they took out the older stands, my marten population started to go down. And then all of a sudden one year I got a fisher. And I almost petted the fur off of it because I'd never caught a fisher before. And then I started catching 70 marten and a fisher. Then I would catch 70 marten and 3 fisher. Then all of a sudden I was catching 50 marten and 10 fisher. And it just seemed to, but all the while at the same time they were cutting.
Right.
So they just changed the dynamics to the point where I would catch 10 marten and I could catch 20 fisher. You know, that's how much it changed.
Because the fisher can utilize that new forest much
Yeah,
better.
yeah. I mean, 20-year-old forest for a fisher is perfect because there's rabbits in it, you know, and it's great for them, you know.
Is that because they're more aggressive, or
I think so.
And so they're not concerned about being ate as bad. Like, I mean, everything eats a marten, right?
Yeah, everything, yeah, for sure. Owls get them, and
Yep.
you know, everybody. Lynx are on them. Like everybody's after a marten. I mean, he's a, you know, when you really look at it, he's a much more fragile animal than what a fisher is, you know.
Oh, yeah, very delicate.
You skin a fisher and he's got 20 porcupine quills sticking in him, like, and it doesn't even seem to fizz on him, you know.
Well, I don't get a lot of that, but you do hear it, do you?
Oh yeah,
Yeah?
especially on my North Bay line, lots of quills in it.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah, it is until you stick your finger on one,
Oh, I bet you.
and it still works.
You mentioned FIC and that you've been involved with the FIC. So, explain what the FIC is and what their mission is.
Okay, so the Fur Institute of Canada is a round table of the fur industry. So it's not just about trapping. It's not, you know, we have government people that sit with us. There's trade people, the auction houses sit with us. There's fur farmers with us. It's a whole round table of the fur industry. It's kind of unique because it's one of the advantages we've had in Canada is we basically, as regulations have come into force, we've been able to keep them pretty well right across the country. When you look at the U.S., everybody thinks they got a better deal with us when we have the agreement on humane trapping and the trap standards and that, but they're losing the right to trap state by state.
Right.
You don't see that issue here in Canada.
No.
And one of the reasons for that is because of the Fur Institute of Canada and the round table of the industry sitting down with provincial government, federal government, some of the trapping associations, and all the different players of the fur industry actually sit once a year at least, sitting there talking to each other.
Okay.
So that's one of the big things that the Fur Institute does. And we do a lot of work behind the scenes that, we don't really want to throw it in the public. But, for example, there's fur bans going on in cities right now, right?
Right.
So
I've heard they're trying to do it in New York.
New York's, yeah, and there's another one coming up, and we're working really hard now to put that to bed, because it's in California. Interestingly, in LA, they ban the sale of fur coats, but they can't ban the sale of wild fur. They can ban ranch fur, because wild fur is a legally authorized activity in the state, so they can't put law on top of that. But because fur farming is fur farming, they can outlaw fur stores by doing that.
Because it's an agricultural product.
It's an agricultural product, and they get around it. But because it's regulated. Now, New York again this is a big battle for us, because that's a very critical fashion center in the world.
Right.
And everybody talks about the Chinese market, but what the Chinese do mostly is copy things.
Yes.
They'll take whatever. They'll take a hat and they'll figure a way to make it cheaper and mass produce it and live off it that way. Whereas New York's a very high end fashion location, and there's quite a bit of garments made in New York, and high end fashion ones that people will copy. So that's a big battle for us, and that's one we can't afford to lose.
I have, I understand the ranching, but I kind of have an issue where I feel like they use the trapper as justification for their own industry, and I'm not happy with how they've relegated those beautiful marten and lynx that we catch to trim. That's only where they've ended up.
I think you have to understand the industry. One of the reasons why we're relegated to the sidelines like that, because it's so difficult sometimes to move wild products around the world because of CITES. CITES is supposed to be a treaty that allows trade in animals that are very abundant. Right. So there's nothing more abundant than beaver and raccoon.
Exactly.
Or lynx. For example, in otter, there's 13 different species of otter in the world. There's only one that there's legal trade in. And it's the North American river otter, because of the North American model of conservation that we practice in North America.
Right.
We license people, we control the harvest. There's all kinds of safeguards. But if you're a Chinese border inspector, customs inspection guy, you can't tell the difference between a giant Amazon otter or a sea otter or whatever.
Right.
It's very difficult to do, because what CITES does is it stifles the trade.
Okay.
So it's about money. It's always about money, right? So if
I'm going to
if I'm going to invest $100 in an otter, and it might get hung up in customs, or it might take me a year before I can turn that thing over, or I can buy a ranch mink, have it dressed and ready to sew in 12 weeks, where are you going to invest your money? Okay. So that's one of the biggest challenges we have all the time, is more regulation for wild fur is not good.
No, not at all.
It stifles, and you want products to be able to freely move, and that's again a role that we're always trying to fight or work with the Fur Institute is to keep an eye on this, and to put up our hand when we start seeing things getting a little bit too much red tape. Like we have an issue with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife, where they, for example, if somebody makes a beaver coat in Montreal and they trim it with bobcat. So it's a Christmas present, so they want to rush it out the door, and it's going to go to New York City for somebody's Christmas present. Because it has bobcat on the trim now, bobcat is CITES, they want a separate inspection and a separate fee on top of that. So these are things that stifle the trade.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So, in the big picture, you don't really notice that, and you say, well, why is the price of lynx no good? Well, because it's a CITES listed species, it becomes difficult to move it around.
That's what it is?
Yeah, that's one of the big problems.
Is that why the coyote is so popular?
Well, coyotes aren't listed on CITES, right? So it moves. You can move the product, right?
I've always wondered why all of a sudden the coyote. Why did they pick the coyote? But that's why?
Well, I think Kate Upton had a lot to do with that on the front cover of Sports Illustrated when she modeled that one for the bikini, the Sports Illustrated.
You're talking to a troglodyte when it comes to Sports Illustrated.
Well, Sports Illustrated does their swimsuit issue every year.
Yes.
And Kate Upton was on the front cover wearing a Canada Goose jacket with the coyote trim.
Okay.
And after that, Canada Goose could do nothing wrong.
Okay.
It just took right off, and I mean they're expanding all over the place. They're putting another 5 flag stores in this year.
They're huge. They're
Huge.
huge.
It's unbelievable.
I mean, when you take a look, everybody tells me that there's no appetite in the North American market for fur, and I just point to Canada Goose and I say, now what? You know?
Now, but see, that's fashion,
Right.
right? And fashion trumps everything. When something's fashionable, like I drive by a lot of universities in my job. I drive down around London. I drive around Hamilton, and you see these young people wearing Canada Goose jackets going to university. You know they can't afford those jackets.
Yeah, that's
but
true.
mom and dad are buying it for them, but they're fashionable. And if one person has one, the next person one, and it just continues to snowball like that. So it's great. And the story with Canada Goose, and by the way, they're not the only ones using coyote trim. Like Ribollati comes to NAF all the time and buys the top lot of coyotes.
That's Italian.
Yeah, it's an Italian manufacturer.
Yeah.
There's Montclair. There's a number of different companies that are using coyotes, and everybody is trying to get in on the fad now. So you'll have knockoffs, and they'll buy the poorer quality. That's why the price of coyote is so buoyant right now.
Right,
It's great, you know. But
part
definitely,
of it is because it's so easy to move around the world.
yeah, absolutely, because you don't need a CITES document to move it. That's a huge.
I wondered about that. I mean, lynx is so beautiful.
Yeah.
There's never, if you have fur laying on a countertop, different fur, and that the ladies go to the lynx
absolutely.
every time.
Every time, yeah.
You know, and then I'm looking at, and why are they putting coyote on their?
Yeah.
So now I know.
Yeah.
That was worth the price of admission tonight.
Yeah, no, people don't, and trappers don't really appreciate that because they just basically want their fur sold and gone, right?
Right.
But it's that buyer at the other end. If he gets his goods held up in customs, and it takes him a month or 2 months or 6 months to get it straightened out, that's the clock's ticking on his money.
Wow.
So that's one of the reasons why. I mean, if you go to an auction and you see ranch fur that comes in, I mean, the males are they got 6X size males now, which are the size of otter almost, like small otter.
Yeah.
And they come in 25 different colors.
Yeah.
And if you want a short nap, you get a short nap. You want a long nap, you can get a long nap. You want a mid nap, they got the quality. I mean, but interesting enough, I mean, probably the biggest problem we have right now with the fur trade is Putin and the price of oil.
Really?
The world's production everything was going great when all the markets were open, but as soon as we lost the Russian market, that's when the whole house started to collapse.
Okay.
So you have an overproduction of fur. It doesn't have the outlets that you like. Everybody buys wild fur, but they were buying it for the Russian market.
Okay.
So the Greeks buy wild fur, the Turks buy wild fur, China buys wild fur, but they were basically manufacturing in the garments and then right into the Russian market. So when Putin invaded the Crimea, the Western world put all kinds of sanctions on him, and most of the sanctions was the control of money. So they lost the free flow of money moving through to make money on money, and then the price of oil, because Russia's probably, if not the largest exporter of oil, at least the second largest exporter of oil. Like they move a lot of oil, so they have a petrodollar like Canada does. It's So that's where we're at. So I keep I always watch to see what the price of oil is. That's one of the indicators that I use to say how fur is going to do. And then the other thing that's really coming crashing down really fast is the numbers of ranch mink are going to be probably 30 million or less next year. So that you're going to see a recovery in the fur market.
That is a huge number. 30 million or less.
That's nothing.
So
It peaked out at 82 million.
82 million.
Yeah.
That's a lot of fur.
Yeah. Yeah. It's billions of dollars worth of fur.
Wow.
Yeah. So when we get regulated to trim sometimes, it's to make that black mink coat look a little more fancier. So they'll put some sable on it, or they'll put some cat on it, or some sort of different type of fur. But when when you take I used to grade wild mink, and when you grade a wild mink, and it's got ticks and scars, it's got it doesn't get fed every day like a ranch mink does. It's hard to compete against that. I think the way that we need to do it is to market it as a truly unique fur.
Yeah.
And get away from the mass production sort of stuff. Like there's only going to be 10,000 coats made like that out of that wild stuff, where there'll be 100 or 200,000 ranch mink coats made.
I agree.
That's the way to market it. I don't think you compete head to head with them, but I think there's lots of room for wild fur when all the markets are firing on all cylinders.
And it's funny because what you're talking about is it becoming a specialty item, which is what fur is. But all of a sudden, because we had all the ranches going on, it became a much more mundane, much more production line item.
Yeah, and I wouldn't say that though, Rich. I would say like without the Russian market. See, there's cities in Russia that are above the Arctic Circle, right?
Right.
And they love to wear hats, and they'll take the fall beaver, which are a flatter beaver, but they're lighter.
Yeah.
And they'll sell them all the smaller sizes all day long, for that hat market. But when they don't have the money to buy it, or the sanctions don't allow that product to get into the country, everything comes crashing down. So raccoon, that's the biggest raccoon market is Russia. It's the biggest beaver market when all cylinders firing. The other thing that they really like is Fisher, but they and you can see the price of Fisher has been kind of hit and miss, really hit and miss. It's no market basically for the big males, and a very weak market for the females.
Yeah, I know. I went from a peak of over $300 for my females to, I think I was top lot in the last auction. It was what,
110,
110 or 112 or something like that.
Something like 112. Yeah.
Yeah, 112 US.
Yeah.
I had 3 in there anyway.
Oh, that's nice. Yeah.
So talking about hats, though, you wear another hat as well with the Wild Fur Shippers Council, I believe.
Well, I wear a few different hats. Yeah. So I'm a director with the Wild Fur Shippers Council, and what that represents is a 25% ownership by the trappers of North American fur auctions.
Right.
So we do a couple of different products. If you would notice, we put all of our DVDs, our fur handling DVDs, on YouTube now.
Yes.
And in French and English.
Okay.
So anybody that wants to know anything about, especially our beaver one, our beaver video was an epic video. It's probably 3.5 hours long, but luckily it's broken down into 6 sections. So you can go on the YouTube now, and you can go to either French or English, and you can watch whatever you want. And there's a great if you've seen the latest IT magazine, International Trapper magazine for NAFA, you'll see where they talk about hatter beavers.
Correct. Yeah.
Well, there's a really good segment in there in the videos. It explains the hatting process right to a T. I mean, that's a pretty interesting trade there. Like, beaver is the best product in the world to make felt hats.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. Now, when you're talking about, I mean, everybody thinks that hats could be just like a beaver fur hat, or
these are Stetson cowboy hats.
You're talking about felting, yes.
Felting hats, yeah.
I actually did a bunch of research for that to write an article on, and it was fascinating.
Very interesting, yeah. Well, Matt is a hatter, right? And they used to use the mercury to in the process, and drove all the hatters mad.
Well, and how it actually started. Yeah, when I did research on felting, and that it's actually started in like 1605 or something like that. The Swedes invaded Germany, and the particular hats they had these really wide brims on it. And it was only beaver that could be, like, any fur can be felted.
Yeah.
Even wool can be felted.
Yeah.
But the beaver was the only thing that would carry off these great big wide brims, and that's literally the making of Canada and North America.
If you look under, and it's the felt, it's the under fur in the beaver. It's not the guard hairs.
Yeah.
And they're barbed.
Yep.
And that's why they really love it for that. And they'll do some knockoffs. They'll use rabbit fur sometimes, or they'll try to throw some wool in it to make a lesser quality. But they're really 100%, 100 proof, best quality hats are made from 100% beaver fur.
And it's actually the better, they like the winter because you have a heavier underfur, right?
Yeah, the summer beaver are no good for the hatter market. They'll buy them because there's no underfur really to speak of.
Right.
So they need that when they actually do it, they cut it in 1-inch strips, and then they shave it all off, and then they put it through blowers, and they separate the underfur from the guard hair. And the whole process is on the video. It's really cool to see.
That is absolutely fascinating.
Yeah.
So with Wild Fur Shippers Council, you guys are also in promoting the wild fur and wild fur sales, that sort of stuff. You work with NAFA, and NAFA does a lot of fashion work in that. They have schools.
Yeah, they have the I forget the name of the school right now, but the Studio NAFA, sorry.
Right, and that's where they bring in people from Asia or from Korea.
Well, what they've done in the last few years is they've run a contest for designs, and they take the winners from a couple of the different designs, and then they bring them in and teach them how to sew fur. So you're trying to plant that seed with new people that are coming into the business, designers, to not only work with fur, but to understand fur and know how to sew with it, and the different processes, because there's so many different little tricks that they can do with it. So it's kind of a prize to the people that win some of the design contests. They have them at the Milan Fair, and they also have, I think, 2 in China that they do.
That's amazing.
Yeah. And then they've taken this roadshow. They've actually taken Studio NAFA on the road. I think that last year they did one in South Korea. They took the actual equipment over and they actually put on a Studio NAFA in Korea.
And it's received well?
Yeah, very well, very well. I mean, anytime you can get that wild fur product in the hands of people, designers, you plant seeds, right?
Yes.
And, you know, wise men plant trees that they'll never see the shade under.
Yeah.
Well, it's the same idea. You got to be out there showing these things off so that eventually the next fashion craze could be some sort of use with beaver, and away it goes. And then we're off. We're good again. You know, it's the way it
wouldn't that
goes.
be wonderful for beaver to be back in?
We need
in vogue?
three. We need three species in the wild fur business for us to rock and roll, and that's beaver, raccoon, and muskrat.
Okay.
When those, because we can produce them in big numbers.
Yes.
And it gets a lot of people involved.
Right.
So those are the three that, you know, really, if we would spend all of our marketing money, those would be the three species that I would always recommend to push on.
It should be nice to see because, especially for kids,
Yeah.
muskrats are where kids all start.
Yeah, absolutely.
I love that one.
Yeah, absolutely. There's something about being out in the spring when you do spring muskrats.
Yeah.
You know, it's been a long winter and then things are melting and it's that smell in the air. You
Yeah.
know, it always gets me worked up when I get out and do that. I think it's just fantastic. The geese are coming back. The ducks are coming back. You know, it's been a long winter
And that's one of the things that we enjoy here that we don't realize. But when you go to live in the tropics, they never have that spring smell because they never get the reset that we get.
Yeah,
and
yeah.
that is so awesome.
Well, we're getting a reset this year because we're getting lots of flooding here in Ontario.
I could talk and talk and talk with you for a long time here yet to go. We'll have to do this again. It has been a pleasure.
Great, Richard.
Before we
my favorite episode of Trapping Inc. is the one you do with I think is it Morley with the wolf trapping.
Yes,
I love that one. I've watched it a couple times.
Yeah, he's an awesome fella.
Yeah.
And he's ran out of wolves on his line,
Oh,
so
there you go.
I gotta convince him to come to my line and get her something. You are doing a video project, YouTube project on your trap line yourself, right?
Yeah, I just and I want to do not just trapping. If you like, it's called Gibb's Adventures. And I'm just trying to showcase trapping, of course, because that's what I do the mostly. But I did a little segment on doing maple syrup. I have a bandsaw sawmill. I'll do some. I'll show the guys how we catch leeches in the summertime for fishing, and I keep bees. So I want to show all kinds of different facets of the rural lifestyle.
Exactly. That's awesome.
Because there's so many people that don't understand where products come from anymore. You know,
not at all.
And it's our culture. And it's sad to be swept aside by somebody in the city that thinks, you know, how can somebody in a city where there's no habitat left for animals tell somebody that lives in the forest year round and makes a living from it what to do and not to do? So that's the reason I'm starting my YouTube thing. And
especially when we have such an incredible venue to put it on. YouTube
it's incredible.
It reaches so many people.
I'm learning more about it every day.
Yeah.
I'm a real rookie to it, so I don't really know what I'm doing. So I'm checking out your camera setup here.
Yeah. Well, it's been a pleasure. Thank you very much. And thank you, folks, for watching. We hope you've enjoyed it. And maybe we'll see you guys down the line.